Okay, so there's a lot I want to talk about here right quick. Let's go ahead and get on into this. So, what we have going on right now is a Shadow and Bone review. First, before I get into the details, though, I want to talk about the three main storylines that percolate through the pages or episodes, whatever. First of all, we have the main storyline. I like these people. I like the mythology and things explored here. This is a good storyline. Quite fantastic, actually. Then we have this second cast of characters we're getting into. Also pretty enjoyable. I have no problem with these people, and the performances especially carry this to great effect. Then we have the problem child. I don't like this one. This one can die and I would feel nothing. Luckily, it also takes up the least amount of screen time, so it's far less than like 1/3 of the show. But watching these two brilliant students hang out with this dunce of the class, it's a bit frustrating for me. I like this. I don't like this. Good? It's not horrible, but it just does not fit in with these two and felt like filler. All right, let's get into the review of the show, where I'll talk about all this again more in depth. Shadow and Bone is Netflix's latest foray into the fantasy genre, and I had pretty mixed expectations getting into this for a couple of reasons. First and foremost, I didn't love the book, but the trailer looked dope as hell, and I'm always down for a good representation of some fantasy source material, so I really did not know how I would walk away from this show feeling. And I'm happy to say, overall, I'm fairly positive. I actually am looking forward to season 2 and think this was a reasonably good execution of this duology of fantasy. For those of you who don't know, though, Shadow and Bone tells the story of a kind of typical YA romp, but there's some interesting elements and some decent enough execution of certain tropes that overall it didn't bug me that it was so clearly steeped in the YA mythos. Mythos, is that the word? Not really, but whatever. We have a young woman who finds out she's a chosen one with love interests abound and backstabbings and twists. It's pretty standard, but I like Leigh Bardugo's execution of it, and I think that's why I wasn't completely negative on my review of the actual one of the books that this is based off of. And the show itself is a really strong representation of that source material in a lot of ways. For this review, I'm going to start with the good, get into the okay, touch on the bad, and finish with some good again. So let's go ahead and start with one of my favorite elements of this whole show, and that's going to be the performances. The actors here are so clearly having a really good time embodying some of these over-the-top characters and just totally giving it their all. For me as a viewer who kind of struggled with episode 1, because I think it's the weakest by far, this show starts weak and improves from there, the performances are what made me stay invested all the way through. Especially Kit, who plays Jasper. You killed it. I love you, and you're great. Like, in the hands of a lesser performance, it could have come off too campy or too corny. This guy's got a charm to him that won me over scene after scene. But there really wasn't a weak performance to find. This extremely diverse cast just consistently hit it well. So that was great. Combine that with a well-structured overall approach to this story, and I think a lot of fans are going to be really happy with this representation of the characters they so clearly love. My one complaint with structure is I actually would have maybe added a couple more episodes because there were certain plot elements that needed to breathe a bit more and felt a bit rushed in how they were handled, and if I had to guess, the writers would agree with me, total conjecture, and Netflix just wouldn't give them the budget for extra episodes, which is a common thing with shows like this. And continuing with some of the good, as I said in the intro, there were 3 arcs here, and 2 of them I thought were pretty solid, mainly because of the character work that carried them. We'll get into that at the end. There was one that just felt very tacked on and didn't have many ramifications for a lot of the other stuff going on. It just felt like this character needs to stay relevant, so we're gonna have him do this thing over here, and it's gonna tie him into the end. But he's not really connected. And that, like, I don't remember the book super well, if I'm being totally honest. I just didn't love the way that tied into the rest of it, but it wasn't horrifically bad. I was making jokes at the beginning. But getting into some of the okay, though, the first one's going to come down to extreme personal preference on my part. I don't like the way Netflix seems to shoot a lot of these shows, and I know these aren't always handled by the same people, so I find it odd to begin with that I even notice some consistency in how Netflix shoots a lot of their fantasy, especially their YA fantasy material. material, but it's not for me. The direction's not super creative. The cinematography is far too dark at times. I really hope a lot of you have high quality screens, because if you don't, you're gonna really struggle to see some of the darker scenes throughout this show. And I'm sorry, no show should be shot like that. Every show should be watchable on any screen, except for like really atrocious ones. But I was watching this on an OLED, and even I at some points was struggling with some of the darkest scenes to make out the details of what was happening. That's not acceptable. And the effects were hit or miss. In general, pretty good, actually, better than I expected. There were a few weaker shots, especially around Amita's power, that just didn't blow my mind or knock me out of the park. But no, I actually probably should put this in the good, because the effects and the sets especially really were above what Netflix has set for themselves in expectations. So I enjoyed that. There's, again, some of the ways it's shot I don't love, but set design, costume design, and effects in general, very happy with. And one thing that I found kind of fun, guns are guns in this show, which I appreciate from a writing standpoint. Like, a gun is lethal even if you're a magic user. There's not just like every magic user ever is like impervious to bullets for no reason. No, if someone shoots a gun, it has consequences in the show, except for a few really bad instances of run at person with gun syndrome, which is one of my least favorite things I see all the time. So I can't even blame this show necessarily. But there's several instances where someone has a gun in the distance and they're running at someone who doesn't have a gun, and I'm like, dude, pew pew at a distance, please. And then there is the bad, and that's going to come into some, if not a pretty decent chunk of the writing here. I just found that this show needed to cover a lot of ground in the restricted runtime that they have, so exposition dumps are heavy. Some of the dialogue I found really corny and clunky. Like, the actors are clearly doing the best with what they've got, but I did not like the script they were handed, especially with some of the just, I'm going to say things now feeling I got from just many of the scenes. Though the performances were strong enough that it did not jar me as much as it should. But I'll be surprised if even the most diehard fans don't have some issues with some of the dialogue handling that happens here, because from what I remember of the book, they've taken some really like drawn out sequences that did a good job of building this world better and just crammed them, which it's just, as like a fantasy fan, is painful for me. I'm sure for more mass audiences that will be acceptable, but as someone who's so steeped in the genre, it's a little frustrating. And again, I just don't enjoy a lot of the YA tropes that are here. There's so many of them that are predictable and plot beats where you're like, yeah, of course that had to happen. Like, there's a scene where of course muscly man must take off shirt, so wound must be treated by love interest, and chemistry, sexual tension, ooh. And maybe like one of the most not believable love triangle attempts I've seen in a show. There is just such a really already moment for a character here. I won't spoil, even though if you read the book, you probably know what I'm talking about. It's just because this show feels so condensed, it does not make sense for me with the characters established. But getting back to the good, this show is at its strongest with the chemistry in the cast, which again touches on the performances, but also with some of the strengths of the writing that does exist. It's not consistently bad. There's some good actual writing stuff here, and there's going to be so many people so happy because there's just energy with so much happening that really left me fulfilled as someone who's not even a big fan of the source material. Like, I had a good time because there's clear love and dedication here. And this goes into like issues I've had with other shows where I feel like I can tell the actors aren't loving it. The energy's not there. I think season 8 Game of Thrones is a really great example of this, where a lot of the performances, suddenly it's like, you're just kind of phoning it in because you don't want to be here and you know this is not good. That's not prevalent in this show at all. Shadow and Bone, the cast is loving it. I feel like the whole crew was just giving it their everything. That's why the sets look so good. That's why so many of the effects are popping. I feel like this was a real passion project where they wanted to please fans. And I think for the most part they did. And with that chemistry, the arcs of the characters, even the ones that are a bit more blunt, really end up working because nearly everyone's motivation is well grounded in the people around them. And that for any story is such a rock solid thing to be building off from, that ends up kind of propelling the show into a higher tier than I think I would have put it in otherwise. I'm pretty happy. If I'm coming in from the perspective I am with not necessarily loving the source material, but still looking forward to season 2. I can't wait to see how excited fans of this show are going to be, and I'm going to be looking forward to people who actually are really steeped in this, world in terms of their passions, reactions to this, because I think it's going to be overall good. And overall, I'm feeling a decent to light 7 out of 10. Let me know what you think of Leigh Bardugo's work in the comments down below, whether or not you're excited for this show. Do you plan on watching? Have you already watched a good amount of it? Continue that discussion as always. Like and subscribe if you have not already. Hit the Patreon if you want to support what I do here. Have a good one, y'all. Peace!